In an age where video game publishers want to keep you playing their games for as long as humanly possible, it is fair to say that many new AAA titles try and force-feed players with all sorts of crap, with not even the end of a game being safe from greasy, money-grubbing fingers. Too often, developers will just lazily hurl boring collectathons and repetitive side missions at the player ad nauseum and call it a day. Yet every now and then, they will go far above and beyond what most players reasonably expect, delivering a post-game experience that isn't just richly satisfying, but is genuinely more fun and challenging than the core game itself. Sometimes these post-game elements are substantial enough that they entirely recontextualize the game on subsequent playthroughs. But whatever they offer the player, these games absolutely save the best until last. I am the bonus round of Ash from WhatCulture Gaming, and these are 10 video games that offer their best content after you beat them. 10. Stealth Camo, Metal Gear Solid. Hideo Kojima's Metal Gear Solid is unquestionably one of the greatest games of all time. Yet as stunning as that initial playthrough absolutely is, things get even better once you've beaten the game and unlocked an extra goodie or two. What players receive upon completion is dependent on whether or not they successfully resisted Revolver Ocelot's torture midway through the game. Button bash your way to success and you'll receive a bandana for your second playthrough, giving you infinite ammo. If you submit, however, you'll get something much cooler. Failing the torture sequence results in Otacon giving Snake stealth camouflage at the end of the game, which can be used at will during your next playthrough, aside from in boss fights and scripted sequences requiring an alert state. Needless to say, stealth camo allows players to freely explore the game's iconic environments, mostly free of disruption, and makes an already ludicrously entertaining game even more fun. Though completing Metal Gear Solid a second time on the same save file will unlock a tuxedo for Snake, the camo's literally game-changing properties can't be beaten, as it basically reinvents the entire experience. 9. Switch between Batman and Catwoman, Batman Arkham City. Batman Arkham City introduced New Game Plus to the Arkham franchise, which removed attack indicators whilst also changing enemy placement, making them stronger and faster, and also kitting them out with more powerful weaponry. The legendarily challenging trial and error boss fight against Mr. Freeze on a second playthrough was reason enough to keep playing once you had rolled credits on the main story. But it gets even better. The player is only able to complete Catwoman's DLC mini-campaign once the main Batman story is finished, after which players are granted the ability to switch between bats and cats as they wish. With Arkham City's sprawling open world freely available to players for the post-game, you can mop up any remaining side content and police the streets to your heart's content, whilst constantly swapping between the two iconic superheroes. What more could you possibly want? 8. Special Worlds, Super Mario 3D World. Anyone who's played a Super Mario game in recent years will surely appreciate that the rather straightforward, easily beaten campaign is really just a tutorial for the decidedly more challenging and far more fun post-game. After battling your way through 8 worlds and defeating Bowser for the third and final time, you will gain access to 4 new worlds, which feature more than 30 extra levels, remixes, and mini-games. This extra content is headlined by the infamous, infuriatingly difficult Champions Road level, lasting around 5 minutes with no checkpoints or power-ups whatsoever. Yikes. Needless to say, this adds hours and hours of playtime onto the game, and with its significantly elevated difficulty, is far more engaging than a core campaign that is arguably breezy to a fault. 7. The Everfall, Dragon's Dogma. Capcom's 2012 cult classic RPG sets players on an epic quest to kill the evil dragon Grigori, and after chipping away for several dozen hours, Grigori is eventually felled in the game's final boss fight. Except, the adventure is far from over at this point. Grigori's demise causes the city of Grand Soren to sustain immense damage, opening up a hole to the Everfall, a mystical land where the game's most aggressive and challenging enemies reside. Not only are you able to battle entirely new enemies and bosses, but loot around the city is remixed and the sheer look and feel of the world is so much more grimly ominous. In the Everfall, the player must destroy the game's real final boss, Seneschal, after which they themselves take up Seneschal's mantle as a godlike conqueror entrusted to preside over the world. At this point, the player's ability to interact with the world around them is massively limited due to their invisibility, and the only way to decisively roll credits on the game is to kill yourself breaking the cycle, as it were. Given that so many post-game experiences provide only superficial revisions of the overworld, the sheer ambition and scope of the post-Grigori overhaul is insanely impressive. 6. A/B scenarios. Resident Evil 2. Because the original Resident Evil 2's brilliantly action-packed core story isn't awesome enough, the survival horror classic presents alternate scenarios for players once they have beaten the game once as either Leon or Claire. The original release has A/B scenarios for each character. Beat Leon's first campaign, which is A, and you'll unlock Claire's B scenario, which allows a player to experience what Claire was up to whilst Leon was doing his thing. Similarly, if you started with Claire's A story, you'd unlock Leon's B alternate. This means that finishing the campaign with a single character is really just the beginning. There are 3 other scenarios to play through, with each character's A/B stories differing significantly. Items appear in different locations, you'll explore the world in a new order, and the terrifying Mr. X appears in the B scenarios of each character. Perhaps most cleverly of all, though, the game's zapping system means that actions you carry out in Scenario A will directly impact Scenario B. Items you took the first time around are absent the second time, for instance. Oh, it's all very exciting. 5. B-sides and C-sides. Celeste. Last year's universally acclaimed indie platformer Celeste is one of the most brilliantly brutal entries into its genre in recent years. Though committed players can battle their way through its tough but fair main campaign in around 8 to 10 hours. That's just where things start getting interesting though, as the post-game calls upon the players to collect a single, impossibly placed cassette tape within each chapter, which will unlock a much harder B-side version of said chapter. For the 8th and final chapter though, there is the additional hurdle of amassing 15 crystal hearts. Slogging through the B-sides will probably take you at least as long as the main game did. But it doesn't end there. Beating the B-sides unlocks the somehow even more challenging C-sides, whilst unlocking the final C-side chapter requires players to collect all 23 crystal hearts. By this point, you are easily looking at 30 to 40 hours of playtime. And it goes without saying that the new tricks you pick up whilst completing the B-sides and C-sides creates an added incentive to revisit the core campaign. While many players would turn such a challenge into a soulless combination of fetch quests and infuriatingly challenging platforming, Celeste is a rare white-knuckle effort that only becomes more entrancing and addictive the more difficult it gets. 4. Jack Marston's Revenge. Red Dead Redemption. Red Dead Redemption's core campaign wraps up in unforgettable fashion, as protagonist John Marston is brutally gunned down by Edgar Ross and his men, sacrificing himself so that his family can see out their lives undisturbed. The game ends with John buried by his wife Abigail and son Jack, after which the scene shifts to 3 years later, where Abigail has since died and the player is given control of a 19-year-old Jack. Rather than simply allowing the player to ride around the world as Jack, his father's weapons, horses, outfits, and attributes carry over, and Jack even has his own recorded dialogue for most of the Stranger's side missions. But the true brilliance of this fantastic postscript is the secret final mission, where the player can track down Edgar Ross and gun him down in a duel, finally attaining revenge for John's death. Only at this point is the game's title displayed to the player, delivering a concrete ending to the story, yet still allowing players to further explore the open world as Jack. Red Dead Redemption 2's postgame was no slouch in this department either, with its extended epilogue, but the sheer emotion and dramatic brilliance of the first games is damn near impossible to compete with. 3. New York Minute Mode. Max Payne 3. New York Minute is a fan favourite mode across all 3 Max Payne games, unlocked after completing the campaign on any difficulty. New York Minute is a ludicrously addictive arcade mode where players are tasked with beating the campaign's levels within a strict 60-second time limit, gaining extra time for both kills and stylish accompaniments, namely headshots and explosions. Max Payne 3 is already a pretty challenging game on normal difficulty, so throwing in a tight time constraint only amps up the challenge. But wreaking havoc as efficiently as possible also proves a ludicrously entertaining tangent to the core story, and one hell of a reason to keep playing. 2. Peaceful Free Roam. Earthbound. Nintendo's iconic 1994 RPG Earthbound was massively ahead of its time when it came to post-game content. After defeating the final boss Gygus, players are able to revisit the entire game world they have just liberated, free of enemies and now able to be explored at your total leisure. Better still, you can interact with almost every NPC encountered prior, almost all of whom will have something new to say to you. Some have moved on with their lives, whilst others haven't budged an inch. You can easily spend several hours traversing the world and observing how everything has changed, which for a 25-year-old RPG is really quite something, and the all-timer cherry on top of an already incredible game. 1. Extra puzzles, dungeons, and boss fights. Kingdom Hearts 2 Final Mix. Kingdom Hearts 2's Final Mix re-release boasts a metric crap ton of awesome new content to work through once the core story is completed. In addition to new puzzles, there is the high-level dungeon, the Cavern of Remembrance, significantly tougher rematches against the Organization 13, and the insanely difficult secret boss fight against the Lingering Will. Elsewhere, there is a secret ending video to unlock and a ton of mop-up busywork if that interests you. But above and beyond what most expect from a Square Enix game, there is heaps of meaningful and challenging content waiting for players not ready to put the controller down when the end credits roll. Given that Kingdom Hearts 2's main storyline isn't terribly difficult, the savage post-game throws the gauntlet down to committed players and asks them to gamely have at it. And that's our list. What other post-game fun belongs on this list? Share your thoughts in the comments section below. I've been Ash, and this has been WhatCulture Gaming. Don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and please come back again soon, because we're always making content, and it would be nice to see you. Thanks for watching.